This is the Danger Close podcast, Beyond the Books with me, Jack Carr. Welcome to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by Navy Federal Credit Union. My guest today is former CIA analyst David McCloskey. He is the author of Damascus Station. His latest, Moscow X, is out right now. And without further ado, David McCloskey. Why don't we just hop right into it in the interest of time?
Let's do it.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Is that Daniel Silva over there in the corner? What do you got right there?
Yeah, I've got a number of things going on over here. Got some of yours. The terminal list I loaned out to a buddy, so that has vanished. You got some Le Carré, some Silva, some Bentley, some McIntyre, a little smattering of the spy cannon over here.
Gotcha. So, oh, you loan books, huh?
Books.
I don't do it anymore. Yeah, no, I don't do it. I'll buy it. If someone's like, "Oh, can I borrow that?" I'm like, "Nope, I'll buy it for you," because once you do, you never get it back. Like it's just
that's true. That's true.
And if people aren't book people, they don't understand. Yeah, if people aren't book people, they don't get it. And so immediately, I'm like, "Oh, you're not a book person if you're asking to borrow that and not getting it for your own library."
What can I say? I take pity on people. You know, I've gone soft in my golden years, I guess.
I used to, and now I'm like, wait a sec. I'm not, and then I never got them back. I'm like, oh, that was a very important book, because I remember like where I was when I bought it, like why I got it, where I was when I was reading it, how it impacted me, like all these things. Like they're so personal, and so
it's true. I will say I get most of the ones that I get back are, I would say I should charge. I should probably charge them for it.
Just make them get their own. Otherwise, make them get their own. Or I just buy it for them now. I just send. That's why I have like some of the books that I gift out more often than not. I have a couple stacks at home. So if somebody we start talking about it or something, or someone's like, "What's your favorite? What's your most gifted book? Or what do you recommend for my son?" Or whatever else, then I'll be like, shoot, boom. But it's not. It's coming from a different stack.
Different stack.
Yeah, it's coming from this is the ones that I can give out over here. I just did it the other day, actually.
I need a separate loaner shelf, I guess, up here. That's what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah, I think so. Oh man, well, let's talk about how you got into what you're doing now. And second book, congratulations, coming out here. And what was that path, especially into the CIA?
Yeah, so I have a sort of joining the CIA story that I bet would make the OSS, skull and bones forebears like turn over in their coffins, because basically,
did you get online?
What's that?
Did you get online and just submit an application?
Well, it was slightly better than that. The guy who ran the Middle East analytics shop, 15, 17 years ago, was an alum of the school that I went to outside of Chicago. And the University of Chicago has a fantastic Middle East studies program. They'd come through Chicago every year. The year he was running the shop, he comes down to my school and shows up at the, IR 101 or 201 class just to start talking about CIA. And, I was like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. But just hearing him talk about what the work of the agency was, like the mission got me excited. The fact that, I'd actually learned something about how the world worked, which was big to me at that point, and still is. I just got really fired up for it. And so I put in an application, I interviewed with him, and I ended up actually in the undergraduate intern programs. I was 19 when I got my full medical, poly, all that kind of stuff, and showed up summer after my sophomore year at Langley to be an analyst. So it was a weird kind of a process in some ways, but that got me in the door. And, I did 2 summers there as an analyst, and then joined full time when I graduated, and loved it.
That is a really cool program that they have. I know somebody else I think FBI has one similar to that, probably some other agencies as well. But no, what a great program to bring in younger people, or at least let them know this is not what I thought, and I'm not going to waste all this time after I graduate from college, trying to get in the door here or whatever else. Wow, this is amazing. This is what I want to do with my life. Like, I think internships are so valuable in that respect. But so you didn't know what you wanted to do when you went to college. I always find that, and I shouldn't say that too much because you know, we have our daughter just left for college the other day, and I realized most people don't really know what they want to do. I knew exactly what I wanted to do from a very early age. So for me, it's like, gosh, there's so many amazing things out there, and we're in this country with all these opportunities, and how could you not like know kind of what you wanted to do? But I guess that's more common. So what did you have any sort of inclination like, I'm kind of interested in this other thing, or what were you like? Why did you were in an international studies program?
Yeah, I was in an international studies.
So you were there for a
reason.
I kind
of had some sense of like, you know, I want to do something related to the world, right? Which is there's a lot of different things that you can sort of clunk into that bucket, right? And, you know, I've been reading, I feel like the books that I picked up, like I have distinct memories of going to like Barnes and Noble at the library with my dad when I was a kid, middle school, high school. And I was picking up, in addition to just sort of spy fiction and, you know, thrillers that are taking place overseas or in these kind of different locations. Like I'm picking up a lot of books about global politics, world history, like for whatever reason, that was my gravitational pull. And so I think, you know, I distinctly remember when I told my mom, like, hey, I'm going to major in international relations. She was like, oh God, he's never going to get a job. Like that sounds like a made up.
Yeah, then there's graduate school, and then there's the doctorate, and then going to teach somewhere and never, yeah.
That's right. So she was like horrified. But I had some sense of like, I actually think that deep down it was this desire, it was this feeling that, you know, there were people and institutions who understood how the world worked actually. And I wanted to learn that. And so when the CIA officer showed up on campus and starts to talk about that job, you know, it felt like the shortcut there, right? Like these are some of the people who have a sense of like what is actually going on in the world, and I wanted to join. So you know, as soon as that set of conversations happened, I think things really clicked.
Yeah,
and I knew from there it was like, you know, to your point of showing up and kind of knowing exactly what you wanted to do. As soon as that happened, it was like, all right, I'm in. This is what I want to do. No doubts.
That person who interviewed you and came to campus, were they there at Langley when you showed up? Or they like ushering you through? So
yeah, they were for a while. They were still running office, and so there was like a crop of us. You know, I went to a small Midwestern liberal arts kind of Protestant school outside of Chicago, and if there's one thing that, you know, a sort of good Protestant schoolboy is good at, it's passing polygraphs. And so a group of us got in, you know, because we sort of had this baseload level of guilt. So they knew we weren't sociopaths, but we also hadn't done anything wrong. You know? So there was a little crop of us that joined together.
And you do a lifestyle poly, right? Like a 2-day deal?
Oh, yeah. Full
at 19.
Full lifestyle poly. Yeah. I would not recommend that experience to many humans.
It's awful. I use it in the Devil's Hand. I start the Devil's Hand with a poly, kind of catch the reader up, or to get people who haven't read the other novels, kind of introduce them to what's happened up to this point, type of a thing. But I use the poly to do that, thinking about my experience, because you did it at 19. I was 33, I want to say, give or take, right?
All right, so you had some more sins to confess.
Yeah. I gave him a couple things. You know, you got to give him got to give him a couple things. And one of the first things they asked me was, have you visited antipolygraph.org in preparation for this interview? I remember that. I can't remember if it was in they must have asked me beforehand, you know, so
right.
Because you fill out a thing beforehand, as I remember. I mean, it's been a few years now, and you fill all this stuff out, and then you go in and you talk about those things first, and then you go in and then answer kind of some the same, similar, a couple other different ones based off your answers to essentially, a questionnaire. But you got to give them a couple little, and I had gone to antipolygraph.org, but as part of a interrogation course that I did in the military. Okay. So as part of that, they talked about antipolygraph.org as part of the different interrogation things that we were discussing and going through kind of scenarios with. And so I went home and I did it was years prior, maybe 3 years before that, 4 years before,
okay.
I think. But so I answered it. So I told him, I'm like, yeah, you know, I went to it, but it wasn't like in preparation for this, but I've definitely been on that. It's interesting to me. And I know your tricks.
Rabbit hole of questions there.
Probably.
Yeah.
But because I was kind of like, what I know your tricks, but at the same time, it's still, even though, you know, like I just like, I'm curious about things, especially in the intelligence world, because there's so much crossover after 9/11, of course, even before, but especially after 9/11, between the military and intelligence worlds and communities. But I was still nervous, even knowing what I knew about the polygraph. I was still nervous in that room because it's like, it is. You can feel everyone else's nervousness over the last however long it's been since they painted the walls. You feel it, the fear, and it's in the paint. It's like in the walls, and you just feel like it's very uncomfortable. It's awful.
I still remember that there was a map of Ohio, like a county map of Ohio, on the wall of the room, and like a bowl of. It wasn't even like a candy you would recognize, but it was some kind of just like, you know, nameless, labelless candy that was sitting there. And I remember, I mean, I was so nervous that I was like asking the polygrapher, you know, I basically, and I was like, maybe it's his office. So I started asking if he had some connection to Ohio, because I've got some family connections. And he looked at me like I was insane, because I don't even think he knew like that there was a map of Ohio in the room, because he just walked in to start administering the polygraph. He's like, what? I mean, it's just this weird, you got the mirror,
yeah.
You're made to feel uncomfortable. And, you know, there is something very strange about a complete stranger. And you've got, you know, at this point, I'm like, I want this job. I feel like this is on.
Yeah. I felt the same way.
Stranger just sort of plumbing the depths of every personal decision that you've made potentially. It's really a nasty experience.
Yeah, it's really, I don't remember there being anything else in the room. And it, you know, it's been a few years, and, you know, some things sometimes there's some overlap between what you've seen in movies or read in books. And then, you know, memory is fallible just as it is. And then, so I don't remember anything being on the walls though. I remember the mirror thing.
Just pure white, like.
That's how I remember it. But now you mention it, I don't know if that's just me remembering it that way, or if it's like from a movie that I've seen that kind of overlapped with my actual memory. I don't know, but I don't think there was anything on the walls. But someone could then show me a picture right now of me in the room with the polygrapher and something very clearly on the wall.
There's a map of Ohio.
Yeah, there's a map of Ohio right there, and that can, you know, it's possible. It's entirely possible. But
did you have to go back? I had to go back. They made me like, I did it, and I thought I was done, and the guy was like, you should come back tomorrow.
I think they do that. I think they do that to everybody. I may have talked to like one or two people out of everybody I've talked with that went through the process who didn't have to come back. But I think part of the game is having you come back.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and I think they kind of leave it out there, like. Yeah. But if you looked at your schedule, if you still have your schedule, and I have my schedule, if you go back to that schedule that they give you for your week, I think that the day after your poly is pretty light, if memory serves, on appointments.
Did they reimburse you with an envelope of cash for your visit?
I think that they did and reimburse me, and I don't remember if it was cash, but now that you mention it, I think there was like not much. I think they did, but I don't think it was much. I was
19 and in college at the time, and so the idea of like showing up to a window and having this, you know, like a woman who looked like she'd probably been working there for 4 decades hand you an envelope stuffed with cash was like a pretty new experience for me.
That's pretty cool.
I distinctly remember that as like a window, and they like lift the glass in the window, and they gave, you know, the envelope to reimburse you for the whole thing. It's
I'm having a memory of that now, but I'm also thinking like it would be with that box of all the stuff. And I ended up getting accepted. For anybody listening, like, what? I thought he was in the military. So yeah, I was going over there, I guess about halfway through my time in the military, and I got a class update. The whole thing was going in, and then decided at the last second the military was like, hey, why don't you go do his platoon commander tour over here? And I wasn't expecting like a counter offer, you know, it never even crossed my mind. But when they did that, I was like, oh, wait a second. Okay, something new is entered into this calculus. So I did that. But anyway, but the process was fascinating, and I've worked with the agency in Baghdad, had an amazing experience with this program I was involved with over there. But going through that hiring process was fascinating. And I think my program, I won't say the name of it just for whatever reason, because I don't know if I've seen it in print yet, but they actually developed it in Vietnam to get guys that were SF one day to kind of essentially the next day, figuratively, be working for the agency. And then they brought it back. I think this is how it goes. I think after 9/11, they had so few people in the paramilitary side, they realized they needed more. And so they reinstituted or reinvigorated or something this program that allowed you to kind of skip a couple steps. I mean, you still had to do the poly, still had to do your psych eval, still had to, write a paper, still had to do a few things, but it took out like a couple steps that kind of fast tracked you into get to the farm and then get back to the paramilitary side, if memory serves. So that was kind of my
interesting.
Yeah, but my first after working with them in Baghdad, I came back, I get the call, and they, because I said I was interested when I was over there, and then I go up to the DC area and go to a horrible hotel. Like, I remember it was bad. This hotel.
Oh, they're all, it's not nice.
It was, this hotel, I was like, wait a second, this is odd. Anyway. And then a guy came and met me and did a talk. And then I think I had to write up something based on our talk, and then he came back, I think, to read my notes of our initial conversation or something something.
They made you write something?
Yeah, first thing in this crazy hotel. And I set it up because I'd heard I'd heard some stories from the farm and all this stuff. So I made sure I had water. I made sure I had snacks, because I knew this guy was coming. So I kind of set it up. I moved the room around a little bit, make it a little less awkward, because it's just two beds. It's just a horrible hotel room. And ground floor, falling apart, motel. I wouldn't even say hotel. I'd say motel if I had to my memory of it anyway. And not a front desk that you then walk in, it's over here and then you walk over here, and it's from the 50s or something, and that hadn't been no renovation.
Agency probably owned it.
Maybe there's cameras everywhere. Probably the guests aren't real guests.
That's right.
That may be true now. Looking back, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, so he came in and I did my, had the stuff. Hey, we like water, we like a Gatorade, like a Coke, whatever else I had there. So while I was doing whatever that he'd have, something. So I was just, trying to think things through a little bit. But yeah, I had to write something that first time, and at this point I'm fairly dependent on spell check for a lot. You're just typing away still back then, and so anyway, it went well, and then it came back up, got another offer, and then came back up and did all the poly and stuff that you're talking about. But anyway, that's how that went. But you're 19 and you're doing your lifestyle poly. That must be you look like you're 22 now.
I'm 22 now. That's right.
So you go do all that, you go back to school. Now when you're back at school, after how does that change the rest of your time in college? Having now interned at the agency, now you have some sort of a clearance. You've been through this lifestyle poly. You've met these different people, and now you're back in school. How does that change your next couple of years of school?
Well, in one respect, it was really nice because I knew that if I didn't screw it up, I had basically figured out. Yeah. I'd figured out by the time I was a sophomore what I wanted to do and where I was going to work, and that felt kind of taken care of, and especially, look, I think when I was an intern, I was at GS5.
Oh, wow.
Pay scale, which, for those listening who aren't aware of the scale is really low. Yeah. But I was pumped, it's this is a paid internship at the CIA. I've got to clear, and of course, everyone assumes that you're just, like all the spy fiction time, everyone assumes it's sort of kind of like that. And so they're like, wow, this is really cool. It just has a cachet to it, which was really fun when I was, 21. Mm-hmm. That was a fun little brand to have associated with you. Right. So I knew what I wanted to do. I was pumped by it. It felt like I had found, where I was going to be. And it was awkward though at school because the agency is not great, especially for employees who are who are overt for a time. I could tell people I was at the CIA, but the CIA is kind of weird about that too. And they don't encourage you to do that. And so it felt a little uncomfortable, especially when I would take classes, on Middle East history or politics or whatever, and it's like I'm studying this region in school and writing papers on it, but then I'm also, you're sort of peeking behind the curtain a bit in my summer internship and then eventually job as to like what is actually going on in some respects. And so that bit of it was a little bit awkward, but for the most part, I was like, I found it. This is what I want to do.
Did they check in with you during your time in college? Like, do you have to check back in, or it's just like, hey, see you next summer?
Once. Yeah. No, it's like they cut you loose.
Yeah.
And I think they maybe sat me down at one point and they're like, you can't, like just a reminder, when you're at school, you can't just start telling people about all this stuff.
Yeah,
there's sort of a friendly reminder about the documents I signed. And then they're like, hey, you're back next summer. So we'll see you next May or something like that. And then you're back in school.
That's awesome.
It's kind of weird, but my understanding is that even now the agency has started to do that kind of recruiting even younger, like freshman year, because it's just increasingly difficult to get people. Like if you, how many 21-year-olds at the University of Texas, Austin could really pass a lifestyle poly?
Exactly. And, no, you get them early. That makes so much sense to get in there early before they make too many mistakes.
That's right.
Yeah. We're like, hey, if you want to come here, this is what you want to do. Like, this is how this is your path. It's on, it's on you to, to screw it up or not. And do you remember the first thing that you worked on back there? And were you surprised? Was it like, oh yeah, this is kind of what I thought I'd be doing this summer, or what was it? What was that like?
So I worked on Syria pretty much the whole time I was there.
Yep,
they put me, exactly. They put me on that account from day one, and I pretty much worked it with a few exceptions up until the time I left. I did a brief rotation in the Counterterrorism Center, and I know you'll know this topic well, but there was a pretty significant flow of foreign fighters in the midst of the Iraq war, who would fly into Damascus, and then the Syrian regime would sort of look the other way, or in some cases actually help facilitate it. And then they would be smuggled through these rat lines into Iraq. And so I did some work for a while on trying to target that flow. But for the most part, I was working on Syria. And, I will say, like, my perspective on the agency, I don't think I would have had words for it at the time. But in reflecting on it and writing the books, like, I've come to this perspective, and I think this is probably true of a lot of big organizations, but I think it's in particular true of CIA, is it's like a uniquely bipolar place. Like, you have this weird bureaucratic government side of things that would be really familiar to a lot of people who work in big companies, right? You've got endless email and meetings and all that garbage and weird stuff that comes with it being secretive and being, the government. It's like, the story I like to tell. And then on the other side, well, just to paint the picture, is like, you have this crazy mission where you have an agency that's doing insane things that I think in many cases match or exceed what we even see in fiction. And so, and you have all that together at once, which is a really weird, and oftentimes in the same day. So I have distinct memories of going into a basement room and seeing footage from a surveillance drone that was like mind blowing. And then going upstairs and there weren't staplers.
Yeah.
Like, and you're like, how is it that an organization that can do what I just saw in the basement doesn't have the ability to really effectively procure office supplies? And like, both of those things would happen like with some consistency. And so I really love the place, but even as a younger person, I thought that was just a really kind of getting to the core. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can talk about CIA, but if you want to talk about it from a institutional perspective, like that's what it felt like to me a lot. It's like, I'm involved in this really amazing mission, and at the same time, there's all this sort of actual procedural bureaucratic stuff. And so in the books, I think it's sort of carried through of like trying to show an agency that's dealing with both of those at the same time.
Yeah, man. Service isn't just what Navy Federal Credit Union does, it's who they are. That's why Navy Federal created tools to help you earn and save more. Make your financial goals a reality with great rates and low fees. Members enjoy earnings and savings of $473 per year by banking with Navy Federal. An average credit card APR that's 6% lower than the industry average. A market-leading regular savings rate nearly 2 times the industry average. Learn more at NavyFederal.org/offers. I've been a member of Navy Federal since I enlisted in the Navy in 1996 and have had nothing but positive experiences with them for what is now closing in on 30 years. Wherever we were stationed, whether at home or abroad, Navy Federal was by our side. Navy Federal has made it their mission to help military members and their families tackle home ownership. With their new no refi rate drop option, you can buy a home now. And if rates drop later, you can then lower your rate without refinancing. Plus, they also offer mortgage options with 0 down payment. So you don't need to wait years to save at Navy Federal. Our members are the mission. Find out more at NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal is insured by NCUA, membership required, equal housing lender, open to the armed forces, the DoD, veterans, and their families. NavyFederal.org. Did you know, were they specifically looking for analysts to focus on Syria, and then are looking in universities around the country for people that they can either kind of mold during their last couple of years of school to focus on that so that you have more of a foundation coming in? Or was that, were other people in your class focused on other areas of the world, or was there a significant portion of you focused on Syria?
A significant portion of us, we really all, because we came through that recruiter who ran the Middle East analytics shop, we all ended up getting put on accounts related to the Middle East. So one of my buddies did Egypt for a while. I had another buddy do Iran. And, I think the theory, I think the CIA basically, and this is a gross oversimplification, but basically hires for kind of 2 types of profiles, especially when you talk about analysts. You go out and you find people who have been doing something for a long time and have a ton of experience. And, their PhD is in Russian history and they speak Russian, and, they wrote their thesis on it and they lived for 3 years in Russia. Go find that person to work on Russia. Right. The other end of the spectrum is kind of where I got in, which is, let's find, smart young people who really want to learn and bring them in young and teach them. And I think that those 2 things together, when the cylinders are firing, that's a pretty effective combination for an analytic unit, because you're really getting a lot of different perspective. You're getting that perspective of experience, and then you're also getting people who are like, hey, I'm 23, but I'm actually pretty smart, and I can ask good questions, and I'm learning. And so, you mix that together, and I think it generally helps.
Yeah. What was the training like after you do your 2 summers as an intern, then you get a real employment offer or something like that. And then you is there a pipeline? What do you do at that stage?
Yeah. So they had a program at the time, and this is kind of what's called agency modernization. There's different ways of talking about it, but a bunch of reforms that happened under Brennan, which made it a little bit easier to kind of move between different types of roles. But back then, you came in as an analyst, it was like you were pretty much going to be an analyst. And so they sent me, I think at the time it was 5 months of just they disconnect you from your main team, right? So I wasn't working on Syria, and they literally just teach you everything about CIA, the intelligence community, writing, the actual process of creating intelligence products, written intelligence products, briefing, things like that. And you're with a class of I think there might've been 20 or so people, and they just take you to another one of these sort of anodyne facilities outside on the ring of, Northern Virginia, and put you there for 5 months and teach you everything that you need to know about what it means to be an intelligence analyst. And, I have to say it was really valuable training, because you really do want to get a deep dive into how do you actually write something that effectively communicates to a policymaker everything they might need to know about a particular topic in a page and a half, which, to the Mark Twain comment about how, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. You realize actually is a learned skill.
Oh yeah. Actually, I found that writing for Instagram, because you have 2,200 characters, has when I do these history posts, there's so much more I want to put in them, but guess what? I can't, because it cuts you off at 2,200 characters. So you have to figure out how to tell a story in 2,200 characters. So I found it to be really beneficial as just a kind of a mind exercise, trying to do. And I don't necessarily do that with my novels, but I do it for like one-page executive summaries for other projects that I have out there. Like, hey, one page, and I'm going to get this out there to whoever, but it's going to be a page because there's so many other things going on, and I have to figure out how to get. What's my end state? What do I want? Well, I want them to take this action. Okay. How do I get them to do that in a page? How do I tell this story in a page for this person, for that audience? So I found that Instagram is actually really, really useful for that as an exercise. But it sounds like you're doing, are they talking about, I guess, end users? And who are end users? I mean, are they case officers? Are they politicians? Is it the executive branch? Is that president's daily brief? Like what are they, when you're going through this 5 months out there, how are they framing what your mission is and why you're doing this and why you're figuring out how to write these? And it's not reports, right? So you're doing something else as an analyst, right?
It's basically like, I mean, the way I like to think about it is it's some piece of like it's almost like clandestine journalism in some way, right? Where you're taking in information from a whole bunch of different sources.
I'm gonna write that down. That's a good one right there. I'm gonna write that down. Clandestine journalism. That's a good one.
But I think I think it's true, right? There are some real parallels between the sort of process of creating finished intelligence and writing an article for the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever.
Oh yeah.
You're working with different sources. When you talk about the CIA and kind of all sorts of intelligence analysis, you're talking about satellite imagery, you're talking about particular, chemical signatures, depending on the intelligence question, you're talking about human intelligence, you're talking about intercepts. Nowadays, this is less true. 15 years ago, you're talking about a lot of sort of commercially acquired bits of information, depending on the question. So you're taking all that in, and when you're talking about humans in the same way that a journalist would deal with this, you're dealing with people who might have a variety of different biases, agendas, who have a particular access point, right, or a perspective that they bring to the question. And so you're looking at all this stuff, and you're basically trying to answer each piece, whether it's for the president's daily brief or it's going to, the Hill for a briefing. I mean, you're basically answering like a fundamental question. So the example I give is when I was working on Syria in the early days of the uprising, the most basic question was, what's going to happen next? Is Assad going to stay or is he going to go? And so you're trying to kind of craft pieces that help readers actually think about that question and answer it effectively. And you're marshaling all the different available intelligence and perspectives to try to do that all in about a page and a half or 2 pages at most. And so a lot of it is just like, how do I write and get the critical, how do I have the critical thinking that then runs into the writing to be able to communicate that to, the president who's going to, glance at a page and needs to take the main points away. So they're really beating that into you from day one. And I will say also, just from sort of a missional standpoint, the fundamental thing, and this is true of the analysts as well as the case officers, pretty much anyone else, is there is a real mentality around Langley of speaking truth to power and taking some glee in it, I think, too, of like, I am going to write down what's happening, why it's happening, and what it means for us. And that's going to be really stripped of any kind of value judgments or political bias. That is almost a religious creed among analysts at CIA. And they hammer that into you from day one. And if you include anything about, certainly anything political, but anything that's almost like a value judgment, they'll strip that out of the writing and really beat you over the head with it. That's a big piece of it as well.
Yeah. Oh man, that's interesting. I was thinking also not just the Instagram 2,200 characters, but when I write for, let's say, an online or print magazine, and now they want it between 800 words and 1,200 words.
Yeah.
And I write thousands good, but even 800's better. 850, 900 is better from their perspective. That's just my sense from my, the sliver of experience that I have doing that sort of thing. But so you have to now tell this story, get your points in 800 to 1200 words, right around the 900 word mark is good, was what I found. But for me, as a writer, I don't know if this book's going to be 100,000 words or 140,000 words. In the case of my last one, it's all about the story. So for me, I'm honoring the story. I'm not like getting to 100,000 and be like, oh, time to wrap this up.
No.
I'm going as long as it takes. And if it takes 105, 115, 130, whatever, or 140,000 words, like that's what it's going to be to honor the story, because people are trusting me with their time. They're never getting that back. And this story, all my heart and soul is going into every single word. Well, when you have 900 words to tell the same or a similar story or a take on something or whatever it is, that's very difficult it's more difficult for me to do that than it is just to have complete 100% creative control like I do in the novels, however I want. And I can go on any tangent that I want. I can explore anything that I want. I can develop anything that I want. Well, not necessarily so when you're sending this a 900 word piece to an editor at a news organization who needs it to be concise and to the point and get it out there and flow and all the things that they need it to do in a certain amount of space. So that's kind of interesting, very, very different mediums, obviously, but it sounds like, you got very good at that during this 5 months and over the time that you're at the agency, and making things concise and to the point, and getting the points in that you needed to get in a page.
I will say that, and I agree with you that, in some respects, if you are a fantastic analytical writer and communicating things very crisply and concisely in like 800 or 900 words, and that's the medium, because you're a great writer of that, doesn't really translate over into writing a novel, right? Because there's so much, you're not really dealing with a lot of character, in those in those short pieces. But I will say it does give me an appreciation for how wonderful it can be when you find when you find an economical way to get in and out of a scene. For example, like how do I get the reader into the setting and then moving? You have to have precision of language, and you have to have a sense of, how do I do this in an economical way without bogging things down? Like all of those lessons from the analytical writing, I think, have carried over well into writing fiction. But yeah, I mean, if you try to take the toolkit and just apply it over, you'll end up with some really dry, awful writing that is going to be artificially constrained and have no soul, and you gotta let the kind of world, you gotta dig down and find the world, or whatever metaphor you want to use. Like it's not you kind of can't box it in. I've found, at least.
Yeah. Did they take you and put you in different departments for a week or 2 weeks as part of your training, so you could see what other parts of the CIA are doing, what other departments are doing, to give you a general idea of what the organization's doing as a whole to make you better at your job?
They did a little bit of that, not as much as they should have, I would say. And my sense now, I mean, although I don't, my sense from people who are still inside is that it's gotten a little bit better in recent years. Like there was some sense that, the parts of the agency, and there's a lot of debate on this, right? But the parts of the agency that were functioning, pretty well, like Counterterrorism Center, dealt with, they put a lot of different types of people together to solve a common problem, and there was some overlap and sort of fluidity there. I think the overall agency is kind of getting better at understanding that, this crazy stovepipe of analysts, case officers, support, tech, with really kind of hard barriers between those, was not particularly effective for achieving the overall mission. So I think it's getting better in the training programs, but I mean, it's probably a whole separate set of conversations, but I do think there's a lot of ground that could be covered there, right? I mean, there's probably a lot of room for improvement when it gets down to like, how do you deal with the right amount of crossover and information sharing in an environment like the agency, where you also need compartmentation to, protect assets and protect sources and methods. Like it's a tough balance to get right.
Yeah, it seems like in the early stage, it'd be beneficial to put you somewhere for a month, and you're in this department for a month, this department for a month, this department for a month. Hey, is that part of that part, not part of that 5 months, but you add a few months to it, and now, okay, yeah, it just takes a little longer, but you're still bringing in people, through different classes all the time, and now you have an appreciation for, oh, now I know what these guys do over here, instead of working there for 20 years and being like, what are those weirdos do over there? Like,
that's right.
And now you're like, oh, now I see what these guys do in the technology and whatever space. Like, got it. I heard before, someone told me before in a conversation, but now I've worked with them and I've been there for a month. I have a personal relationship with whoever in there, appreciation for what they do and all that. It just seems like it would be make the organization stronger as a whole. You can get read in and out of secret programs. People get read out and in and out of secret programs all the time. So it sounds odd that they wouldn't do that. It seems such a natural thing to do to make the organization stronger as a whole.
We were getting good at it, like in a lot of the Middle East accounts. We were getting good at, like, okay, analysts, even if you're not going to go and be an analyst in station or whatever in XYZ country, like, do a 4-month TDY out there to like actually get to know, not only just to be in the country, which has blindingly obvious good sense to that, but like to actually get to know the people in the station, right? So that you don't have this sort of 10,000-mile screwdriver dynamic of, the people at headquarters or don't really understand what's going on in the station and are trying to turn the crank on a place that, is functioning to a very different beat. Like, we were pretty good at that. And then I will say that, like, the reason I got ended up doing that rotation in the Counterterrorism Center was, like, got introduced to it in that training program. Like, I actually went and sat with the officers there for a month or something like that, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And you get to know people, right? And those connections become the thing that, like, a couple of years later, I know 4 or 5, 6 people down there, and they're like, well, come over here and work for a while. It facilitates that kind of crossover, which, like in any place, really comes down to who, people and relationships that you've built up. So the agency was okay at that. I think it's gotten better. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what it was like in the SEALs, but there was a lot of crazy bureaucratic stuff at the CIA where you kind of scratch your head and be like, none of this makes any sense, and we all know it, and yet it's the way it works, It's
a huge organization, which by definition is gigantic bureaucracy. And I'll get this, the gist of this will be right, but I believe one of the couple lead people at RAND during Vietnam had never been to Vietnam, I believe. And
that's unsurprising to me.
Yeah. But I'll have to go back and look exactly. I was doing some research not too long ago. So that's the general gist of it anyway. And Rand was commissioned, of course, to answer a question and do it the way they do it. And especially back then, and I think they're based out of Santa Monica. And but I think the lead, one of the main guys hadn't been there. One of them had, but I think one of the other kind of the juxtaposition hadn't. Anyway, there's something like that, which it's pretty interesting to me to work on something or be the subject matter expert on Russia or Syria or Iran or Brazil or whatever else, and having never been there. That's odd. Maybe
and it's sort of doubly hard, and it's this trap that I think the agency gets into across really all cadres, right? Like case officers, analysts. Is like you get to the hard target countries where presumably you want your best people. You oftentimes have this issue of like, well, you have the pipeline or sort of the funnel of humans who have a bunch of experience either there or working closely on it, or the language like starts to whittle down.
Yeah.
If we had some kind of abundant need to, have a crack team of people working on, Italy, we'd have tons of people who have immense travel experience there.
Right, yes.
But like when you get to North Korea would be a great example. You're all of a sudden like, well, we want our best people working on this issue, and yet the number of people we have who would be really highly qualified to do it is just narrow. So it's a tough problem to solve.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I almost went to North Korea in right before September 11th. I was set to go for, I think it was a month, and it was Yeah, it wasn't like a secret or anything like that. It was like a overt thing. You're going in military,
Right.
and you're going there. It was part of a program type thing with a link to. I think the link was remains of U.S. Service members from the Korean War. But anyway, it was an exchange Europe, and then I had a couple other things on the side that I was supposed to be looking for to report on when I got back. But then September 11th happened, complete shift, boom. But I was looking forward to that. I was really looking forward because I didn't know anybody who'd been to North Korea. I didn't even know it was a thing until they asked me to go and be part of this group that was going to go. And you're staying at a hotel or whatever. But I was really interested in going, and would have been in the fall of 2001 is when I would have gone.
Then they had to sub in Dennis Rodman to take your spot after.
Is that what he did? That's right, didn't you? That's right. I do remember him going over there at some point. And did Jimmy Carter go too? I think
he. It seems like he would have gone.
Hey, yeah. Anyway, but it's all very all very interesting. And what's so you go through this pipeline. How many years were you at the agency?
I was there for 8, including the internships, and then I left I guess I would have left in the spring, early summer of 2014. So I've been out for almost 10 years now.
Okay. And what was during that time? How long did you go? You said you went to Syria for a little bit?
Damascus
I was in Damascus Station.
That's right. Yeah. No, I worked Syria extensively, both from Langley and the field, let's say.
What was it like going over there when you finally got to?
So I was there, like my time there ended literally a month before the uprising started. So I left, I was like wheels up early February of 2011.
Yeah.
Was my like last couple weeks there. And I will honestly say I loved Damascus. I loved Damascenes. I loved being in Syria. Like it was one of those places that there's a certain magic and charm to it. It has this very feeling of this very sort of eternal city. I just fell in love with the place and the people. And it was interesting being there in that time because we were starting to watch the beginnings of what became, the Arab Spring. Like we were a couple months in. I think Ben Ali had fled and Mubarak was under pressure at the time. And you had this sense actually in Damascus of like, honestly, I remember watching the Night of the Camels. If you remember that scene in Tahrir Square where Mubarak brought guys in on camels and they were beating protesters. I remember actually watching that from Damascus and looking at in the Syrians who were in the restaurant. You could just see like this kind of thing starting to change of like, maybe it doesn't have to be this way. Because the region had become so ossified, so just kind of stuck. I mean, you had a lot of these guys running these countries had been there for decades, or their families had been there for decades. There was a real political stasis, and you can just kind of feel that starting to bubble up. And it was, it was a wonderful experience to be there and to see that and to kind of feel the beginnings of it. And of course, obviously, things ended up tilting and going in a very dark direction, but. I'd love to, I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back. But I hope that someday, I'll be able to go back to that city because I just love it. And one of the reasons why, I wrote the book was I just fell in love with the place.
What surprised you the most after having studied that region for so long, that country in particular for so long, and then to get over there on the ground? Was there anything that stood out to you as like, wow, I got this right from afar, or man, I had this wrong, or hey, well, this was surprising. I never anticipated this. What were some of your impressions once you actually put boots on the ground?
One of the things that I think we had some intellectual understanding of, but it was limited and probably not as visceral as actually being there, is that there is a tremendous difference. It's been building up over time between the cities and the countryside and areas around them. And we knew that, right? There were a lot of different factors for that. There'd been a horrible drought out in eastern Syria. And so people had come in from that part of the country to kind of settle in these shanty towns around the cities. And, driving through those areas, you were struck by this sense of destitution that was almost spiritual, right? Like it was so deep and you could feel it when you were there that no amount of working on the topic from afar, right, would have ever made you feel the way you felt when you could see this contrast between the way that the well-connected in Damascus and Aleppo lived and the people who were literally, half a mile away from them in these other suburbs. And I think that's one of those things of like, you kind of get it in your head, but then you're there and you can really feel it. And it gives you a sense of how motivated a lot of these people will be if given the opportunity to try to change things, because their lives are just so, politically, economically, they're just got a boot on them. That feeling was really raw when I was there. I remember that one distinctly from traveling around the country.
Yeah. Is there anything that you, actually, before we do that, give us the one pager on Syria. Like if someone's like, what was going on over there? What's the background when someone finds out that you're a regional expert in Syria?
I'm a novelist now, so I'm going to give you the 30-page version. Okay, I can't possibly do it in a page anymore. So, gosh, I specifically requested easy questions for this conversation.
Paragraph, like yeah.
The country has been in some version of a civil war that's gone from hot to cold and back again, since 2011. It really began, when I was working on it and the tail end of my time living there, like it really began as a relatively peaceful uprising against the Assad family and the Assad regime, which had been in power in Syria since 1970. It began like a lot of these do, where it calls for, economic reforms and political reforms, more dignity, things like that. And Syria, much like Iraq and Lebanon, its neighbors, has this very complicated ethnic and sectarian mix that makes mass uprisings difficult to prevent from sliding into, okay, the organizing principle here is ethno-sectarian, and so it gets fragmented really quickly. And Syria, what ended up happening was you basically had a break of, Sunni Arab protesters who were, rising up against a largely Alawite dominated security and military apparatus. Alawites are a sort of Shia offshoot that live in the mountains of northwestern Syria. And the Assad family are Alawite. And it became it just rolled into basically a, civil conflict and then eventually, a civil war. And the country essentially fragmented across a number of different axes. But, there's still pockets of the Northwest that are not controlled by the government. And I think it's sort of probably hard for people here in the States to even comprehend, but essentially the country disintegrated. You had half of the population is either displaced or has fled. You had hundreds of thousands of deaths, tens of thousands, if not more, people disappeared. Use of chemical weapons on the battlefield, infamously. And a place that's like the poverty rate, depending on how you calculate it, is probably like 90% of the population now. It's essentially the country is essentially, like, to think of it as a country, like you look at it, a map of the world, is not right. It's a set of different fiefdoms run by warlords. And one of the primary exports now is Captagon, which is an amphetamine that's being produced by the Assad regime and sold abroad, essentially the drug trade. So it is a, completely broken place. It's not that there is some semblance of order, but it's broken down into fiefdoms now. And the civil war is more or less, stalled. Assad hasn't won really, but he hasn't lost, and a lot of the others, a lot of the rebel groups have indeed lost. So it's very sad what's happened, and that was longer than a page. You can tell that.
Oh no, practice. Man, yeah, no. It's such a confusing part of the world for people over here that then see our government taking either whether it's tax dollars or aid or whatever we're doing. People are, wait, what's going on over there? I saw something about it like 10 years ago, but is that still going on, or what? It's just, it's not front and center. Time to get back training in case I get a field this fall, as I've been doing a lot more writing than I've been doing working out lately, which is why I was so fired up for this care package from First Form. I tried the protein meat sticks right away and absolutely love them. Protein meat sticks from First Form are similar to protein bars as far as benefits. First Form protein meat sticks are a delicious and very convenient way to get more protein throughout the day. Protein is essential to any health or fitness goal. No other meat stick like it on the market, packed with a full 20 grams of protein in each stick and only 200 calories or less total. It comes in 5 incredible flavors: original smokehouse, seasoned barbecue, Cajun style, jalapeno heat, and breakfast sausage. Great for a snack at the office, in the car, on a hike, or anywhere you're on the go. Check them out. I've also been drinking the Opti Greens 50 from First Form. Opti Greens 50 is a precisely formulated greens superfood powder meant for overall immune system support and digestive health. 50 hand-chosen ingredients in precise and effective amounts with non-GMO and non-synthetic superfoods that provide a well-rounded blend of vitamins plus antioxidant-packed ingredients for overall immune health support and defense against toxins in the air and in the foods we eat to keep us as healthy as possible all year long. Go to firstform.com/Jack Carr. That's the number one STPHORM.com/Jack Carr to receive free shipping on any orders over $75. Once again, that's firstform.com/Jack Carr.
Recently on Change Agents, an Ironclad original from executive producer Jack Carr, host Andy Stump sat down with investigative journalist Nate Halverson to discuss how countries like Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia are grabbing up the world's food and water supplies.
Can you explain a little bit that 15 square mile property in Arizona that was bought by the Saudis and what exactly they are doing there?
Because there are ancient aquifers under there left over from millennia past with large amounts of water. And so they bought about 15 square miles and began tapping into those aquifers, pumping out huge amounts of water to grow hay in the Arizona desert, and then ship that to Long Beach, where it gets packed on shipping containers and sent back to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh. 70 to 80% of the water that we use as humans goes to growing food. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you go somewhere else and you use that place's water to grow food in that place, and then you ship the food, and economists will refer to this as virtual water. So the food becomes an encapsulation of the water. So if you are water short, like a desert country like Saudi Arabia is, what you really need to do is go to another place to tap their water to use it to grow your food and ship back the food as an encapsulation of water.
To see the full interview and more, check out Change Agents wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube at This Is Ironclad.
Did they tell you when something that you wrote was going to end up in the president's daily brief, and did they come to you and say, hey, either he or the national security advisor or whoever is really interested in this, but you need to expand on it a little bit because they're going to ask this question or something like that? Did they come and tell you, or do they come after the fact and like, hey, that thing you wrote a week ago made it into the brief, and here's some follow-up questions or something like that?
The answer is it could go both ways. I mean, so sometimes there would be an article actually tasked, like someone who receives the PDB, let's say the Secretary of Defense or the National Security Advisor would have a question, right? And they would ask that question to a briefer, and the briefer would bring that back, and it would land on my desk or someone on my team's desk, right? So that's one way it could happen. Another way is we would actually initiate a lot of these where, we would see something happening, like a topic. We're like, hey, this clears the bar. Like the president should read this. And that, as you can imagine, is an intensely bureaucratic process to figure out.
Who's deciding that? How long does that take?
There's a whole shop at Langley. I think it's now rolled under the DNI in some capacity, but for the longest time, it was on the CIA at the CIA. I think it was on the 7th floor, where they would basically, there was an editor of the PDB, like it was a newspaper, right? And they would sort of figure out, based on articles that had been written months earlier, the general kind of flow of the PDB over the past few weeks, like or just frankly, what the president was interested in, what articles should go in on any given day. And if the PDB has changed, it kind of changes president to president a little bit. But, they were like maybe 10 articles that would be in the main book. Mm-hmm. And then the briefer could decide to pull in other things. So like that happened also, is I might have written something that's a little bit longer form, and the briefer might put that in and leave that behind, for one of the national security principles or something like that. It's kind of a goofy process, and man, it really actually oftentimes sucked to be the one on tap to write one of those things, because I think there were 8 or 9 levels of review.
Yeah.
You were almost always going to stay there until very late at night, and not infrequently you would find out at like 1 a.m. that they had decided to cut the article.
Yeah.
And then you would just, so you're like, there are worse things that have happened, but you're like sitting there, eating something out of the hot dog machine downstairs, and, you find out that they cut it. So it's a bit of a bizarre process, but articles can make it in any number of ways. And certainly when Syria was hot, we were writing them, 2, 3, 4 times a week.
Yeah. It seems like that briefer, does the briefer work hand in hand with that editor then? Like what's that?
Yeah.
It seems like a very powerful positions to be in. Yes. Figure out like, oh, he needs to see this. He doesn't need to see that. Like that seems pretty.
It's very hard to figure out like what makes the bar, what doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, you can essentially shape U.S. foreign policy by what you decide to include and what you decide not to.
Yeah.
Like you could be very Machiavellian about that. It seems like you could be very Machiavellian about that and put like over time, like slowly, just like subversion. Like you could subvert that document. It seems by like, let's say you want to focus on Syria and let's say not on Iran or not on Brazil or whatever else. And hey, you're that editor and that briefer, and maybe that's your background. Maybe that's where you came from. So you're naturally more inclined to put that stuff in. Yeah. And well, what happens down in Honduras and Brazil or Cuba or Mexico, maybe that's not your thing. And so I don't know. So maybe it just seems like there's a way for that that document to be subverted consciously or unconsciously just because of your background. Totally. It's very interesting.
Totally. I mean, the big fight we had was in early to mid 2011, the Obama administration really wanted it to be true that Assad and his regime were sort of just going to fall, that it was pretty much inevitable, and that it would be not bloodless, but close. It would be relatively straightforward. Like they desperately wanted that to be true. And a lot of the pieces that we were writing, whether it was about the emergence of an insurgency, or whether it was about the staying power that Assad and his regime had, right? Those pieces were not particularly welcome in the administration at that time. And there was, I think, a lot of pressure at Langley, or, some of it was probably just self-generated to kind of, how do we introduce these topics? And so we would write, sometimes you'd write PDBs and you'd go through that process, and then the editor might cut it. And on the team, you're kind of thinking, do we just not want to go down there with bad news? Because you don't, to some degree, you're in this weird world of like, we need to speak truth to power, but we also want the access. And if you're sending pieces down day after day that kind of crap all over a president's foreign policy agenda, they start to not want to read them, and they don't want to listen to your briefer, and they want to tell you to pound sand. They'll go talk to somebody else to get their Syria analysis, because they don't have to read it. They don't have to listen to you. I think when you're working at CA, you get into this kind of myopic, worldview where you're like, oh, I'm working on the most important things in the world, and the president's looking to me and to us for our opinion. Yeah. They're getting stuff from everywhere. They're getting it from random people who swing in for conversations or from the news, and so you're competing with all of that information. And so, yeah, to your Machiavellian point, I think they're probably, although maybe not many occupants of that editor's chair, the seventh floor, would admit it. I mean, there's, you're sort of probably picking your battles and trying to figure out, how do I put together a PDB that doesn't like piss the president off today? We don't want that necessarily. So
it's so interesting that because it's you could also be trying to build political capital for something else.
100%.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I guess I didn't realize that there was a briefer every day in my mind, because I think there's a book called The President's Daily Brief, the PDB, that I've been meaning to read for a while.
Yes, David, my friend David Priest wrote it. It's very much worth a conversation, and he'd be a good guy for you to have a conversation with, because he goes through the whole history of it, in and out, and like it's fascinating. You know, for a topic that's like literally the book, little piece of paper that get put in front of the president every day. It's like a very fascinating, colorful history.
Oh yeah, and I can imagine, because I didn't realize there was a briefer. I thought that it was like a newspaper-ish thing, that it would be there for his coffee in the morning or something. And if he had a question, like the national security advisor would be there, like waiting for him and be like, "Hey, so you really need to pay attention to this today." Like there was at least there might be a filter there, depending on the president, or maybe some president might just want to read it as it is without anybody else's analysis yet, or anybody else's like, "Hey, pay attention to paragraph 3."
That my understanding was that what you're describing was very much how Barack Obama took the PDB. Is like he was a reader. He wanted to kind of just sit. He was learning by reading, right? And he did not have these. Again, hearing this through the grapevine, he didn't have these kind of boisterous conversations like George W. did. There was like a whole group of people who would go, 9 or 9:30 in the morning. They'd have most of the national security principals, the CIA briefer, who were all in the room going through the PDB together and having a conversation about it, and things would come out of that, pretty free-flowing discussion, taskings for covert action work, or here's a follow-up question, or let's, we should talk to this, world leader about this. My sense is that the Obama administration was a little bit more reserved in that respect, right? So there's like a different atmosphere to these things depending on the president. It's that briefer that was a big job. I mean, that was something that, you weren't like one of the more senior people in the building, but usually you became one after, or you were a few steps away from it if you had that job. Like that was a stepping stone to
a rite of passage that you needed to fulfill in a way that maybe presented the agency some accolades, or like, hey, this guy's squared away. Like, let's bring him up and move him up. Or, oh my gosh, that guy's a disaster. That girl's a disaster. Like, move them aside. Like they're not going to do well in that next position, or something like that.
If you're like, the ones I remember from the George W. days, like they're in the room for those conversations. Amazing. 6 days a week, like you're getting this really rare view of, the policymaking process, the national security principles, how intelligence fits in. That tended to be a job for the best and brightest, or whoever the agency thought were the best and brightest would be able to do that work.
It'd be really interesting to cross administrations and see two, be the same briefer, and brief one president and then the next, just to see the difference. That would be really interesting. It seems like there'd be some high burnout though in that position.
You're also
the president, I guess.
You're up. I mean, at least when I was doing it, those briefers showed up at midnight and they were there overnight. They go do the briefing in the morning, and then they come back and do some more work. I go home and sleep a little bit in the afternoon. They're doing that 6 days. I mean, so it's kind of, you're the face of the agency. So you're the one, if something's wrong, you're kind of the one getting, shoot the messenger kind of a situation. So I don't think it was a tiring role. Let's put it that way.
Did you ever get word back that, or you hear through the grapevine, it might be in the PDB book, that I definitely need to read, that say we heard that some president in the 70s, 80s didn't even read the thing. Or something like that. Then he come back like, why are we doing this? We keep hearing that he doesn't even read it, somebody else to read it and pick out the points, or maybe he doesn't even do that, or something like that.
My favorite, I think that's definitely true. I mean, my favorite piece of feedback, because the briefers would put together these notes afterward to try to let, the analysts and everyone else know what had been the reaction to a piece. And my favorite bit of feedback was read with interest, which basically meant, we don't know if they read it. We didn't talk about it. They might have flipped the page. Read with interest. So whenever you got read with interest, you knew that was probably a miss, or maybe they were just like, okay, Syria, I'll have national security advisor deal with that. I'm not going to read that. Next. Let's keep moving.
What would it say? It would be the kind of clue that, oh, he's interested in this.
That's right. Yeah. Well, exactly. What let you know that there was interest? Was there like a grunt at a particular paragraph, or
it seems like a polite way of saying like, we're going to move on from this topic, like read with interest. Yeah. That's
right. That's exactly right.
Who's interested? Oh, so you're telling me there's a chance.
You're telling me there's a
one
chance.
in a million.
What's all this 1 in a million?
Exactly. Exactly. Oh my goodness. That is wild. Did anything ever happen where they wanted you or another analyst to actually go to the White House? Like you see in the movies, like,
oh yeah,
get that analyst in here, get Jack Ryan in here right now. I want to talk to him. And then Jack Ryan goes in and says, sir, boom, boom, boom. And off they go into some grand adventure.
There were certainly not me, but there were people who they tended to have grayer hair than I did at the time, who had been around for a while and who, in particular on topics like Iraq and Afghanistan back in the day, who like had become known to the administration, so my sense is that happened to some degree, but like the agency actually kind of jealously guards that, like who goes down, and it's a whole, as you can imagine, that's another like awful process. Because if there was going to be a Syria briefing in the Oval, that's the kind of stuff that'll get you your, if you're a 13, you might get your 14 based off of that going well. Like, that's a good little, notch in your belt. And so there's a lot of fighting in the background over who gets to go do those briefings, because there's just not that much time at the end of the day in the Oval, right, with the president. Like, that's pretty rare. So we ended up with, a lot of times you would have, as also happens in large organizations, a slightly more senior manager who may not know the details all that well would get up to speed over the course of a few days, and then go do the briefing. So that dynamic happened as well.
Man. And then what was there any time when you were there or sense that you've just paid attention to what's going on in Syria with U.S. forces involved? You read things about Russian mercenaries and Wagner Group and, all these things that sound like a novel and all this. Did anything like that happen while you were there, or since you've been out that you read in like, the Times or, Washington Post or whatever you're reading these days, where you're like, interesting.
I do. I can't claim credit for this. So one of my former colleagues who's written recently passed, sadly, but wrote a wonderful trilogy of books. Jason Matthews, he wrote Red Sparrow and Palace of Treason, The Kremlin's Candidate, former CIA guy. He said once, he's like, you know what? Vladimir Putin does a pretty good job at giving me plot ideas. Like it really is true. And I think it's probably, true for your books as well, that some of the craziest stuff and some of the best ideas come at the germ of that, if not the whole thing. You can find it in reality, and I've actually had things that I put in the novels that were true, that my editor was like, no one will believe, this is like, it's almost too outlandish. Like, you can't put this in. Everyone will think it's made up. It's like, well, no, that's actually true. So I do find that the best inspiration for plot, and frankly, a lot of times for character, comes from reality. It's from observing what's going on, in the case of our novels in the secret world, those are like the best ideas.
Yeah. So U.S. involvement in Syria, do you have any touch points with that, or sense looking back, are there things that you piece together that you read about and say, I think this is really what's going on over there, just based maybe not, but awesome.
Yeah, I'll say, like, after having had access to all the classified stuff on Syria while I was inside, and then seeing what was out there in the press, I think it kind of makes me sad to say it, but it's made me, and it's really kind of independent of the media outlet, right? This isn't a comment on like mainstream media or anything. It's just literally like, if you're reading something in the open source press, like, you are not getting the full story, almost full stop. There is other stuff going on behind the scenes that you're just missing because you don't have access to it. And I think, I think that's the case with, Russia, Ukraine. I think it's the case with Syria back in the day, Syria now. When I read, something in a random, Times or Fox or whatever it might be on Syria, I always kind of go back to thinking about the gap between the intelligence and the press reporting back in the day, and just think like, what am I missing? I know I'm missing something. And I'll be honest with you, being out now, it kind of bothers me, because I feel like I know that there's some other kernel there, and I just don't know exactly. I can kind of, especially on Syria and Middle East, I can kind of piece it out a little bit better. But yeah, it was actually one of the challenging things about the Russia book was like, I kind of knew as I was reading things, there's stuff I'm missing.
Yeah.
And, how do I try to plug those gaps? It's kind of maddening for somebody who took a lot of pleasure out of having, out of knowing what was going on in the background.
Yeah. The first time I realized that, I think was 2006. I mean, there's times when nothing makes the news that you're involved in, and that's kind of feel like that's kind of normal because you're in that doing things in that world. But then when something that you're involved with does make the news, and I remember being in, it was when I was attached to the agency and seeing I believe it was CNN the next day on TV in our little room there that we were working in, and they put the camera like on the ground, and so that the brass, so like 556 and 762 like were littering this street because we were in this firefight the night before, and so they put the camera on the ground to look at those, and then go up through the street and buildings and all that stuff, and it talked about what went on there the night previous, and it wasn't like close. I mean, so in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, what else have I been reading all these years? Because I try to, take in as much news as I can and just try to be as informed as I can to be an informed citizen. And back then, so I can make better decisions on the battlefield or whatever. But
right.
But in my mind, going like, oh my gosh, what have I'm missing probably a lot on every story. So that was when it really, popped out to me that things that I hear in the news, there's probably a little more behind the scenes.
Yeah. No, it's 100% true. And, the only way that I've found to like try to manage that now that I'm out is honestly finding oftentimes people who are still in, who will point me to select pieces of
this
information
is close.
that exist
you might want to take a look at this
source, and who will say, read this, because oftentimes you're culling through so much information. If you're trying to get down to what happened with the Prigozhin coup attempt, right? Like what am I supposed to take away from this? Like what sources of information do I go to? I found it's easier to think about it, not in terms of outlets necessarily, but in terms of there are specific people who are more trustworthy and reliable on particular topics. And I'll watch them, as opposed to kind of looking at it from the standpoint of, a newspaper or a media outlet where it's just going to be sort of hit or miss depending on which stringers they might have had, going out and getting information, or which journalist is actually typing it up, that's the only way I've found to be able to kind of navigate it. And I think my sense is my antenna is a little bit, I don't know. It feels like it's not as accurate as it probably once was when I was on the inside. You can do that direct comparison to your point of like, oh, I actually have a specific piece of, clandestinely acquired information that I trust that says X about this. And then in the press, it's like, why? I don't get it.
Yeah. Oh man. And why did you decide to get out?
Yeah,
sounds like you enjoyed it.
I did. I loved it. I got to a point where I thought, if I don't leave, I will never leave. And I wanted at the time to kind of see because I'd been in since I was 19 basically, and I'd been the only job I'd had since college, and including during college. And I felt at the time like I wanted to go and see what else was out there. So there was that sense. There's also a sense my wife and I were in DC. It's like, we want to get out of DC. Like, we need an escape hatch here. I want to get out of DC. Syria at the time, to be quite honest, was like, I was very frustrated with the way that was going down. And I was basically told I was going to just keep working. And so all that stuff kind of conspired at once, where I said, you know what, maybe I'll come back, but I want to go out and try something else. So I left. I took a consulting job, which was good in some respects and awful in others.
Yeah, what was the consulting job again? I know we talked about it.
Was with so I was a business consultant with McKinsey and Company. And that was a great experience, not for sleeping, but it was taking a lot of the agency skill set and applying it to problems in the private sector. was like satisfying for a while. And then I got to a point where I said, you know what? I just don't think I want to keep doing this either.
How long did you do that?
I did that for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah,
so when we first talked, that's what you were doing when we first talked.
That's what I was doing when we first talked.
Okay.
And what Damascus Station came from, it kind of actually traces back to when I had just left the agency. I was processing Syria. I sat down for a summer, and this was before we had kids, still in DC, getting ready to leave. And every day I just started writing to kind of process that experience. And I ended up with 100,000 words.
There you go. You got a book.
Something that looks like a book,
now it's
but
time
then
to,
when I
now
went
it's
back
time
and
to
read
edit.
it, it's like,
Yeah.
this is not a book.
Now it's time to edit.
Time to edit. But then I wrote that, and then the consulting job started, so I just kind of put it away. It was impossible to have a side hustle doing the McKinsey thing because you're working an insane amount and traveling all the time. And I got to a point where I was burned out with the consulting gig, and I think the first time you and I talked, I had actually taken 6 months off.
Yes, that's when it was.
And I was like, I'm going to go back.
Yep.
I'm going to pick this manuscript up, and I'm going to try to turn it into something that other people might want to read. It was basically the charge I had for myself. And, I think having the time away from Syria and the time away from CIA in some respects made it easier because I could kind of look at the thing with some, objectivity. And one of the things I had done a lot of in that time as a consultant was I actually gotten back into reading spy fiction. Like I had stopped for a while when I was at the agency because I was like a lot of people do when they're inside. You're struggling with this, like you're reading these great spy novels, and then you're like, well, I'm dealing with the stapler problem here, So I can't, I don't want to read this. It's not giving me energy. And I got back into the spy fiction. I thought, I'm just going to take a stab at this. And so the writing ended up being, I left the consulting job a few years ago and pretty much just writing full time now.
I forget. Did you go back to it after that 6 months off for a little bit?
I did. I went back for a year.
Okay.
And then because I finished the book in that 6 months, I wrote it. I mean, I had the other manuscripts, I had characters and that. So I wrote it really quickly, went back to the consulting job. The first time we tried to sell the novel, it was like, I think it was literally the second or third week of February of 2020, which as it turned out was not a good time to submit, submit books to New York publishers. COVID hit, things just kind of stopped.
Okay.
And so, I was consulting for that year. And then eventually, like late in the summer, found out that we'd sold it. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to, I think, just kind of, take a chance, right? That I can do this thing and really, see myself as a writer. So stopped being a consultant and just started writing.
Yeah. So I think so Michael Davidson connected us, right? Is that?
That's right. Yeah.
Michael Davidson. Yeah. Shout out to Gen Next. Now Alder. For anyone out there listening, Michael Davis, what a great guy. He's just awesome. Human. But he introduced us, I think, on text. And I remember where I pulled over. I think about you every time I drive by it because I think I was on my way to either pick up because my daughter wasn't in the car because I pulled over to talk to you. So it was on my way to into Wyoming to pick her up from camp. And so on my way, spend the night in Jackson and then drive off the next day to pick her up. But I mean, I don't think my first novel had come out, but it was it coming out?
No, I think Terminalist was out.
Was out. Okay.
Because I think shortly after you and I spoke, I read it. But I do not think True Believer was out yet.
Okay. So it was right around there. So it's 2018.
It was right around there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because I remember because I was looking, because they were still busy, even though there wasn't, I've never not been busy. But anyway, so I'm going on there, and for a long section there, you don't have cell service. And I think we had a time set, and it was like in the middle, like between two, there's like a little dirt road. And every time I pass it going to that camp, I'm like, that's where I pulled over. And I pulled over there because there was like a bar. And so I was like, okay, well, if I have this call and I keep going, I'm going to lose them. But here we go. And I pulled in there, and then we had we talked and got to know each other a bit. And then, off you go continue writing and finish it up during that 6 months, and then back to McKinsey for a year. And then bam, full-time writer. I wanted to let you know about some awesome new products launching on officialjackcar.com for the fall-winter season. And these ones fire me up. What are they? I'm glad you asked. One-of-a-kind collaborations with my friends at Origin, Triple Lot Design, Ball & Buck, Dynamis, and more. I sincerely appreciate everyone who spends time with me on the Danger Close podcast. So right now, there's a discount code for podcast listeners. Just use promo code DangerClose at checkout. Once again, go to officialjackcar.com, click on shop in the upper right-hand corner, and then use promo code DangerClose at checkout. Thank you so much. More to come. Stay tuned. How did you find your agent? How did you get it to that stage?
So my my first agent, I found, like, basically my wife. So my wife was at a think tank in DC for a number of years, and one of her bosses had an agent because he'd written a couple books, and that agent, who also repped like David Ignatius, another spy fiction writer, like the agent, my old agent, did pretty much nonfiction, but he did a little bit of fiction too. And so I literally, through my wife's connection, emailed him and said, "Hey, I'm working on a novel. Like, I'm kind of dusting this manuscript off, former CIA." And he got on a call with me and listened to my, not so great at the time elevator pitch for that novel, and had some tweaks to it and some thoughts, and said basically, look, it sounds like it could be interesting. When you're done, send it to me and I'll read it. Which doesn't sound like much, but for those out there who
that's huge.
Gone through this whole querying process, it's huge. It's like, okay, I get to skip the slush pile at least here and at least get an honest assessment. And so I was like, great, I'll just drive toward getting him on board. And I finished it at the end of those 6 months. I had a whole bunch of people around me read it, some agency contacts to kind of, really beat it up. And I felt like I had gotten it. Little did I know I'd have to go through several more editing stages, but I got to a point that I felt like it was perfect. And then I sent it to him, and I think, 10 days later or something, he sent me a note back and said, "Hey, I love this. I'd love to move forward with you. I've got a few thoughts." But then it was just from there off to the races. So I had a really easy finding the agent story. But, it was, I got lucky. I was very blessed to have had that connection, and for him to be somebody who's like not doing a ton of fiction, but doing enough of the kind of fiction that I'm doing, where he had an eye for it and was interested in it.
Yeah. Did you send it to the CIA Office of Pre-Publication Security Review?
Yeah, I have not. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I've seen this from your social media, or like if you and I had a conversation about it, but you've had like crazy stories of dealing with the DoD censors. So the CIA's Publication Review Board is really actually pretty efficient and sensible, which are two words that you don't normally associate with the government bureaucracy. And I will say, like, with both novels, I have gotten responses back within 2 weeks. And I have had, I know, like, you probably want to reach through the screen and strangle me for that experience. And I had this conversation with Don Bentley, who I think is similar to you, gone through this wild process with the DoD, which I don't quite understand. But CIA is different. Like, I even had with Moscow X, I refer to an entity called Russia House inside CIA. And initially they had come back and said, "No, you can't." And I was like, guys, this actually, like,
isn't there a movie called Russia House?
Well, it literally, the origin story
here.
There's a book called Russia House that got turned into a movie with Connery. Like, it actually isn't the name of the CIA's Russia entity. Like, if you look at the org charts, it's not Russia House. It came from the Le Carré book. Like, that's
things I found from those books.
And so I was like, guys, this isn't even on the org charts. And by the way, then I went and found another agency officer who had written a book and referenced Russia House, and her book had gone through the Publication Review Board. And you know what? They changed their opinion. They're like, okay, you can use it. So I was like, and all of that happened within a matter of a couple days of just some back and forth. So it's like, it's a very largely efficient process, and they still do the crazy stuff where they like send it back with the blacked out highlighter. And I remember when I sent Damascus Station in, I sent it in, it was like a Word document, and it came back, it was all in caps. And they had, which what kind of program is doing that? I don't know. All in caps, like it was a cable or some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And they just, the classic black highlighter through the stuff that you can't say. And some of it you kind of look at and you're like, really? You're editing, this and not this other stuff? But, they were, mostly a pleasure to deal with. And I have not had the experience that you've had. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Are you self-censoring as you go through? Or are you like, hey, I'm sending this in, so there's no need for me to self-censor anything here. So I'm just going to write the best book I can. I'm going to send it in, and what they take out, I'll appeal if I feel like I should appeal. Are you self-censoring or no?
Yeah. I do. I feel like there are some things that even if I were able to get it through, or because, I'm dealing with another human right on the other end, they can miss things. Maybe they're not that good in some cases. And so I don't want to put things out there that feel irresponsible from the standpoint of sources or methods or things like that. Now, I haven't had many instances in the writing where I have had to do that, but I'll say that, I've definitely done it a couple times in each book where I've written something and then I've looked at it and I've said, I probably shouldn't, and so I take that out. But I will say on the flip side, I source the hell out of my novels before I send them to the PRB. So I go through and I like, okay, here's where I got this. Here's where I got this. Here's where I got this. To kind of give me confidence that it's not coming from the classified regions of my brain, but then also to kind of facilitate the process with them to show them like, hey, this is actually already out there. So you telling me I can't put it in is insane. And that has worked pretty well too.
Yeah. I just gave somebody some advice the other day, a guy that I work with in Iraq in the CIA who's getting out now after a long run. And he asked me about this and I'm like, hey, just write the best story you can, write the best thing you can.
Yeah.
You're going to send it in anyway. So that's somebody else's job to take it out, but write the best thing you can possibly write.
Right.
So that's what I told him anyway, but maybe that was bad advice. So I don't know. Text him.
No, but I mean, look, let me put it this way. The things that I've taken out have never been critical to the story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't, that would be a tough one if I felt like something really on the line from the agency standpoint is critical to the story. But luckily I haven't had to cross that bridge yet. Yeah. And I generally, I don't know, I'm not an old hand at this by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel like the best elements or the things that make the story resonate with readers, the details are an important piece of that, but it's not at the end of the day, it's going to come down to things that are more just about basic storytelling and the craft of writing than it is about this or that secret thing. It's, I don't know. I maybe I'm wrong, but I have not, I don't know. I think that great storytelling trumps all, right? I mean, some of those details can be minimized or even fudged.
Yeah. Oh man. And you got some people in the back. You got Petraeus on this in here, David Ignatius, of course, Leon Panetta. I mean, you got a bunch of people talking about Damascus Station, which is pretty cool. The best spy novel I have ever read. General David Petraeus, right on the cover. Man, that's pretty serious. How'd you get in touch with those guys?
I sent letters.
Yeah.
I had briefed them when I was inside, but I don't think they would have remembered me, put it that way. And honestly, man, I will say the answer rate on a personal letter to somebody is relatively high. If I wrote notes and talked a little bit about our shared experiences and sent a copy of the manuscript, and to both Petraeus and Panetta responded back relatively quickly saying, hey, love to read it. And if I like it, I'll blurb it. And they were very generous to do that. But yeah, it was letters. I literally, for Panetta, with Petraeus, I knew people who knew him. And so I was able to kind of get in touch that way. But with Panetta, I literally cold emailed info@panettainstitute.org or something like that, his out in California. And, just introduced myself and I got in that way. It was all just, I don't know. I just kind of pounding the pavement and writing letters and, making those connections, because I had meaningful interactions with both of them on the inside, right? So that's I don't know. I don't have a better story. I just literally wrote them a letter and they wrote back.
Hey, no, that's good. That works. So when we're talking about classification, what do you think now that you're on the outside? Do you put any thought into the JFK documents still not being declassified after essentially a law that in the 90s is mandated by Congress, 2017, you're going to declassify all these things, and then having two administrations, both parties in a row, not declassify everything? Like,
it is weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, for people that think the CIA had something to do with it, they are really going out of their way to make it seem like they did. Like, if you didn't, you're really making it look like you did.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, the agency has also never cared about, like, I don't know. I guess there's like a conspiratorial part of me that's like, maybe we're still trying to hold on to some of the cachet, so it makes it look better if we hold on to this stuff. I mean, it's very hard to wrap your head around continuing to classify information that is from the 1960s. Like,
people don't trust you already. When you're having a trust issue already, like, you're not helping that by walking in and having a private conversation with two presidents, and then having them essentially violate the law and not declassify these last few documents.
What do you think is in there? Just out of, like, because I honestly, like,
that's the whole thing. Like, you guys are making yourselves look very complicit in this by just not declassifying all this, and you're violating a law. Now, at this point, you've been told by Congress in the 90s to do this, 2017. Like, you have a date. You have time to prepare. Like, and at the last second, you go in and have a private conversation with the president, and now it's not declassified. Like, that's odd.
Was this not turned over? Because I think it was like 06 or 07. It was like right when I got there. They had the big, like, family jewels dump, because Tim Weiner wrote that book, Legacy of Ashes. He had a whole bunch of stuff in there. There was a decision made, like, around the publication of his book to, like, I think Hayden, when he was director, made it to, like, let a whole bunch of this stuff out and declassify it, which they did. But I guess, did they hold back on specific stuff related to Kennedy? Like, they just they didn't.
Yeah, and their Congress mandated it in the 90s, 2017, and comes up last second. Didn't happen. And then next president, comes up. Oh, COVID. We haven't had time to review these documents since 1963.
They're too busy clearing my novels. We couldn't possibly have the human resources to do that.
Exactly. They're too busy working on these things.
That's right.
Yeah, we were much too busy, working on Damascus Station in Moscow X. We can't possibly get to the law that Congress has mandated us to do. It's frustrating, and it doesn't help instill trust with this organization that's having trust issues.
It definitely doesn't. It also just makes me, because I have again, it kind of gets back to the comment about the agency being, like, weirdly bipolar. Like, I could see one angle of this where it's just so devastating, right, that it's been held back. The other one is that it's a total letdown, and there's a whole bunch of stupid bureaucratic reasons that this stuff is not getting let out, and then it's a total letdown, and that the agency could care less what anyone thinks. I could see either of those being true. I desperately want it to be true that there's some sensational thing in there, but I've been disappointed a lot in the past.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they haven't enough time to burn documents, because they're definitely, like, the church hearings and the Pike Committee hearings in the 70s.
That's right.
But yeah, we're just going to burn these things. It's ridiculous. I mean,
Church Pike. One of the things I will say is, it is crazy to have gone back now, especially since I've been out, and to just kind of, like, understand what the agency was like back in the 50s and 60s. I mean, those guys were having some fun. Let's put it that way. I mean, it was just
essentially violating laws with impunity,
left and right. I mean, crazy. I think when I go out, and whether it's talking about the books or the CIA in general, I have to, like, do a lot of work to try to convince people that there really is a fault line between the agency of pre-Church Pike and the agency post. Like, the agency was not domesticated prior to Church Pike, at all. Like, it was essentially doing kind of bagman work for the president, all around the world,
or against the president in one instance.
Right.
Talk about Alan Dulles doing the exact opposite, essentially, of what President Kennedy wanted in Africa, in particular.
That's right.
Other places as well. But I mean, it's wild. I mean, like today, you're going to jail for those sorts of things today. Back then, it was like that's just what you did. And so anyway, it's a fascinating history, and I like to weave it into my novels, and especially the conspiratorial aspects that they don't do a good job in countering, through their PR, hence the JFK documents that are still classified after all these years. Yeah, it's wild, but they give me a lot to work with. I mean, there's so much history there, and then you get to kind of wonder what were in all these things, these mysterious fires that broke out here and there over the years, some intentional, some, those things have burned up in the warehouse type thing. In the classified warehouse with all the fire extinguishers and all these.
It's amazing how easy it is to
fire
lose
detectors
documents, they vanish.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I get to work with all that, but then I get to imagine why were those burned? What was sensitive in those things? Why did those things disappear? Then I get to work with it and fictionalize it and put it into a novel.
What's been your because I wrestle this in my books too, of like how because you want there to be some groundwork of like the reader gets in and they say, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about, this feels real. And then in certain points you want to like play with the reality to make the story better or to make the plot work, whatever it might be. I don't know. I'm always just curious, like, how do you balance that in your books? Because you have this grounding of authenticity, and then you've got stuff like you're saying where you're imagining it, right? You're building it into the world of the story, and it's a balance, right? I don't know. I find that often when I'm drafting, I'll kind of look back and say, hey, this is like too bureaucratic and stupid and lame. I don't want it in here. And then in other cases, it's like, this is too crazy, right? I don't want to include this because it'll stretch reality. I don't know. I'm curious how you balance those things.
Yes, I do what's natural. And at the end now, from the fourth book forward, I've included an author's note at the end that talks about what was real, what was not, about what the person just read, so that they don't. So if they have those questions and they're curious, well, here it is in the author's note. Here's what was real and here's what was not. So I do that now. But for me, it's all about that story. I like that foundation in authenticity, that foundation of realism, whether it's feelings and emotions behind certain things, or it's an event, or even just a name that's dropped out there for me to explore later, or for that person to have a connection with, like, I remember that. I remember reading about that in 1987 or whatever, 95, whatever it was. So I love doing that. I love weaving all those things in there that have a touch point with reality, and I find it to be very natural to do that. So I have a great time.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I can't wait to see what these JFK documents someday. I mean, it might be a whole bunch of nothing, and then we'll be like, why did you make yourself look guilty for all this?
That's my point, is it's going to be on an extreme, right? It's either like extremely damaging and wild, or it's just like a complete nothing burger. And you're like, this is disappointing. You've gone through these years of withholding it and making people highly suspicious of your organization, and feeding kind of, any number of conspiracy theories, which, are interesting because some of them are true. And like, it's I don't know. I wish I had some inside knowledge on that, but I've got.
It's fascinating. And why is Alan Dulles essentially running the Warren Commission? That is a huge one. That's a huge one. If anyone wouldn't have been on that commission, it should be called the Dulles Commission. It shouldn't really be called the Warren Commission report, but to have him even on there and essentially just, I mean, Gerald Ford was on there too. I mean, it's really interesting back and looking at that point time in history, because it was such a pivotal point, which is why I keep going back to it. But anyway, moving forward, this latest book right here, Moscow X, bam, right here. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the latest novel.
Yeah. So for this one, I basically started with an imagination of what would it look like if the agency, from a covert action standpoint, just really took the gloves off against Vladimir Putin. And so the title of the novel, Moscow X, comes from a fictional component in the book that is charged with coming up with outside the box or highly aggressive covert action options against the Russians. And as they're planning laying these out, they come up with an idea basically to make Putin feel as though a coup is underway without it actually being true. So it's kind of a classic whisper campaign type thing that they're trying to seed. And the officers in the novel come upon this pair of bankers in St. Petersburg who are this kind of linchpin in Putin's personal finances. And so go to work on trying to target and recruit them. And one of the bankers, named Anna, unbeknownst to CIA, is also a Russian intelligence officer. And she's kind of this very interesting character who's playing a game like all her own. And so there's sort of a cat and mouse tale that ensues from there. But, you know, as I wrote it, it kind of became, or at least I hope it becomes, you know, the story of like really truth and loyalty and also just revenge in the middle of the real kind of shadow war between Washington and Moscow. And that's why I played a lot in the novel. Like Damascus Station deals from a kind of tradecraft standpoint with kind of classic out of embassy operations. And in Moscow X, we're dealing with more commercial cover, exotic cover, you know, Knox, the world of officers under non-official cover, Knox, who for obvious reasons have a lot more leeway in who they can talk to and spend time with. And so most of the characters in the novel, both Russian and American, are Knox, or the Russian version of it. So had a lot of fun with this one. And, you know, I'll say it almost killed me to write it, but I'm very happy with how it's turned out.
Nice. Why did it kill you to write it? How come? You just put all so much into it?
Man, I'll tell you, like, so it's not a sequel, right? It exists in the same universe as Damascus Station, but it's not tracking with the same protagonist from Damascus Station to this one. So that was already right there kind of challenging because I was pretty committed up front to like creating a brand new cast of characters with the exception of maybe one. So that sucked. That just was hard, you know? And then the other thing, I'll tell you, I wrote about 120 pages of a book that was basically not this at all. And because my process is not highly structured or linear, like I'm kind of, when I'm starting a book, I typically have an image in my head of where I want to go. Like I have a climactic kind of scene, and I don't even have characters, but I just have like an image. And I try to go there. Okay. And I found with this one that I went down this path for 4 months of writing and it wasn't right. Wow. And so I literally just threw it away.
Oh, well, it might be useful. It might be useful at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually, you know, I have a copy of it on my computer, but like I just put it all in a folder, started a new one, and just started over. And that was brutal. You know, I mean, that's just rough to go from like feeling maybe I'm clipping along here and up to, you know, 50, 60,000 words and then just to kind of throw it away and start over. That's pretty rough. But I finally found a way to get to kind of the image that I had in my head. And Moscow X is what came out of it.
Nice. And when does this come out?
October 3rd.
October 3rd. Awesome. And have you started the next one yet?
Oh yeah. I'm so I would say I'm like 99% done with it. Like I literally am within a week or so of being done. I've been faster on this one. And the third one, the working title right now is called The Seventh Floor, which is the CIA's kind of, you know, executive area. And it's really a mole hunt. It's like a classic mole hunt.
A great title. Love the title. Kind of bummed I didn't think of it.
It's an homage to Tinker Tailor, the classic Le Carré novel. And man, it's been also brutal, less brutal, I would say, and really, really fun to write because it's amazing. I mean, as you know, like you get into these things and they just get so complicated in the best and worst ways. So I'm like finally ticking and tying a few final pieces, and then, you know, the next couple of weeks we'll be pretty much done.
That's awesome. It's funny that you say done because that's what I tell my wife. She's like, I thought you said you were done. I'm like, yeah, I'm done, but I'm not
done.
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact terminology that I use because it's so true. Like, yeah, finished, done. And she's like, oh, great. Now it's free time. No, now
Incorrect.
It's downtime. Yeah. It's a lot more work to do. It never ends. And I love it. Yeah.
I feel like being a writer, you're sort of signing up for just homework in perpetuity, right? Like you're never like, yeah, I say done. It's funny. My wife and I have a similar kind of language because basically I would say done to you or to your listeners, but like to her, it's kind of, there's different stages of the book process now. I mean, we don't have that many, just two. We're kind of getting a sense of it, right? Like there's different stages. They all have different highs and different levels of misery to them. And they're never actually, at least I'm never done until I just hit a deadline that my editor is basically like, I'm going to fly to Dallas and murder you unless you give me the book. So, you're done. That's done is when it gets.
When it's actually out there and you can make no more changes, it's off to the printer, right. and it's actually printing. Like that's
right. It's physically being printed.
Now it's done. Yeah, totally. Oh man, awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for taking time today. Moscow X, awesome. Thank you for what you did at the agency and for writing these novels. And man, I'm looking forward to really looking forward to The Seventh Floor.
Thank you.
Don't let them talk you out of that title. It's a good one.
Okay, I appreciate that, and thanks for having me on, man. This is great. This has been
absolutely no great to hang out, and hopefully we'll link up in person soon.
Likewise, yeah, it'd be awesome.
Awesome, man. Take care.
All right.
Black Rifle Coffee Company. You can help Black Rifle Coffee raise $1 million to benefit veterans through the boot campaign. All you need to do is grab a can of ready-to-drink coffee online or from your local grocery or convenience store. The Boot Campaign is one of the most renowned veteran-focused nonprofits in the country, working tirelessly to provide life-changing aid and benefits to service members and their families. Join forces with Black Rifle in the Boot Campaign from May through the end of the year, where every can of ready-to-drink coffee you buy will contribute to making this massive donation possible. Black Rifle ready-to-drink coffee is available in several great-tasting flavors on the Black Rifle Coffee website, at your local convenience or grocery store, and no matter where you are, you can fuel your caffeine fix while supporting veterans. Every time you crack open a can of ready-to-drink, you'll be making a huge difference in the lives of veterans and their families. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to serving the veteran community, and with your help, we can all continue to make a difference. Let's raise a can together to keep fueling Americans for a good cause. Check out blackriflecoffee.com/dangerclose and use code DangerClose20 at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. blackriflecoffee.com/dangerclose. Drink up. Welcome to the gear highlight portion of the Danger Close podcast. First off, thank you to Badass Workbench. That's Badass-Workbench, who made this. Great group of people out there. Be sure and check them out. And Fort Knox safes. Awesome. Absolutely loving that safe. Probably need another. Hold things like this. This is the SIG P320 right here from the Custom Works shop. So I got to build this one and go into Custom Works and concierge service under the Custom Works part of the website. And you can build whatever pistol you want in a 320 or a 365. So very cool. So check them out, 6hour.com. Also, DC Vintage Watches. So right here, you can see that this is the Captain Willard Seiko right here. So DC Vintage Watches, and this is the one from Apocalypse Now. Not the actual one that Martin Sheen wore, but an example of the one that he wore. So very cool. Wanted one of these for years. DC Vintage Watches, tracked it down and made sure it was working. And this is just super cool. So thank you guys. Sincerely appreciated. Tacticalories. Oh yeah. I love the Tacticalories. They have a set that they sell for Thanksgiving. Last 2 Thanksgivings, I have used it on the turkey and it's been awesome. So thank you guys for sending me the new seasoning right here. And yeah, very cool. So tacticalories.com. Be sure and check them out. Also, Covert Threads, made in the USA. These socks right here. There is a former Marine who runs this, and yeah, very cool. Looking forward to checking these out. So thank you for sending these socks. I'm always in search of the perfect pair of socks. So Covert Threads Firstform.com, Marine owned, operated, made in the USA. Be sure and check them out. And First Form, and hardly any more of these Opti Reds left. So I've been having taking the Opti Reds every day and the Opti Greens here every day to power me through the podcasts and writing of the 7th novel. So be sure and check out firstform.com. And that's it for today. Take care out there. Thank you for tuning in to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by Navy Federal Credit Union. To find out more about David McCloskey, go to his website, David McCloskey Books. That's DavidMcCloskey books.com. Also follow him on Instagram at McCloskey Books. You can follow me on the social channels at Jack Carr USA, officialjackcarr.com. That's the website. Click on shop in the upper right-hand corner for the merch. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe. Be strong. Keep fighting.